Okay, we're live. I'd like to introduce Vaishnavi. Um, she's a devotee in ISKCON Alachua and also does a lot of work with victims of abuse. Uh, we're both sort of processing the latest developments regarding the Lokanath Swami case. What we're really mindful of is that whether or not an organization takes action, whether or not community members provide adequate support, often individuals who suffered abuse, survivors of abuse, having to reconcile the effects in their own life and pick up the pieces and actually decide what to do with their life. So that's going to be the focus. We had Rambaru last week. She was talking about things from the perspective of I forgot the word now, but from one particular school of thought, and Vaishnavi will be approaching it from another school of thought, and in due course we'll have devotees from different persuasions, counselors, and so on. So over to you, Vaishnavi.
Guru is a chaplain.
Chaplain, that's the word I was looking for.
Really wonderful chaplain she is.
So maybe you can say a few words about what you do, what's brought you to this work, who you are, and so on, and then I'll ask you a series of questions about the topic at hand.
Sure. Well, as you said, my name is Vaishnavi Dasi. Originally, I'm from Montreal, Canada. And what brought me to this work, what I do, my particular, the way that I do healing is I do intuitive energy healing. It's a way that we address trauma from an energetic perspective. The perspective of, we understand that, as devotees, we know that we are pure spirit souls. And so as the soul is never affected by any of the trauma, by anything really material. It's not, the soul is not affected. So what is affected in how are we affected by suffering in this material world is through our minds, the mind and the body. So obviously we have the covering of the soul is the subtle body. So I work with the subtle body. I work energetically with the subtle body, with my own subtle body. I can tune in to my clients' subtle bodies. I can feel everything. I have, if you want to use the words they call clairsentience, and also empathic as well. So therefore, I can feel energies and I can feel blockages in someone's energy body, or even in the physical body as well. So I go from a perspective of removing the energy of trauma, removing the energy of resentment, anger, you name it. Any energies that are negative, I can feel them and I can move them out. So that way, people feel an effect right away, like immediately, because a lot of time in psychology they describe the mind as being part of the brain, but actually the mind is all around us. It's the energy body, it's a subtle body. So I do have also some level of understanding of psychology as well, which is very important, because when you're dealing with the psyche, it's a very, very fragile place for anyone, because we're not pure devotees. So therefore, it is affecting us. So I have to honor that. So that's one of the main reasons why to say to someone, well, it's just your karma, is not going to be very helpful, because the fact is the person is really suffering. So it's important to be empathic to that. And so basically, with the understanding, like I think you mentioned to me earlier, in one of your, in the Vedic Inquirer, I'd mentioned to you about Peter Levine. He does somatic experiencing. I've learned a lot from his work, especially his work with children. He has 2 really, really valuable books for any parents. I would highly recommend these 2 books. One is Trauma Proofing Your Child, and another one is Trauma Through a Child's Eyes. And it really, really helped me to understand, because a lot of time we think because someone is a child, that they get over it. But the thing is, most of the clients that I work with that are adults, all the trauma that I clear is usually from the childhood. So this view that because they're just a child and they cried and they got over it doesn't mean that it hasn't stopped. You see?
Yeah,
So
let's explore the effects of trauma a little bit because, as you say, it's often misunderstood. People they think they can throw a Bhagavad Gita quote at somebody, and if that person's sincere, they'll just be able to instantly transcend whatever's happened to them. We were talking earlier that there are various ways in which the effects of trauma might play out. It could be lifelong depression or issues with faith was one of the things that came up in Ram Baru's conversation. I know myself, I've had lifelong issues with authority figures. That's often led me to even jeopardize my career at times, because I'll feel almost pathologically inclined to take on an authority figure that I don't see as trustworthy in some ways. Even when sometimes you have an understanding that these things are happening, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are fully in control to some extent. And, there are other things that we've talked about. Addiction could be an issue. So I wonder if many of the people who'll be watching this will either be people who are survivors of abuse themselves and maybe at various levels of addressing the traumas that come from that and the issues that arise from that, or there may be people who know others that have been abused. In fact, it's very unlikely that someone will be living that wouldn't know somebody. So what advice do you have, both for people who are themselves survivors, but also those who know a survivor, about how they can become aware of these problems, including, I think we were talking even somatic injuries, and also the best ways to address them? I'd love to learn a little bit more about your process.
Okay, so that's a lot. So let me see if I can break it down.
Sure.
Well, one of the main thing is that, in my opinion, unless one is a pure devotee, everyone is traumatized because it is Kali Yuga. So in Kali Yuga, I say sometimes to my devotee clients, because those who are not devotees may not understand that, but I often say to them, Kali Yuga is very brutal, on the conditioned souls. It's a very, very difficult age. I think Mother Rambaru actually touched on that particular aspect of Varna Shankara last time, the unwanted population, right? Now, when you think about the word unwanted, like I can say 99.9% of all of my clients have extremely low self-esteem. Now, it doesn't mean that they're not successful. I have people who are very rich, that are my clients. They're very wealthy. They're driving these very expensive cars. And if you look at them, and plus they're very successful in their business. But when they're on my table, on my massage table, and I go in, it's a whole different thing. Most people have issues with their self-esteem, their self-worth, because of that feeling of being unwanted. And I think it's a lot of the ripple effect of one traumatized person becomes a parent, and then they have a child. And because of the trauma and everything they've been through, they also pass that on, or the way they will deal with the children. Now, trauma doesn't necessarily mean that it's something as intense as molestation or even heavy abuse. I've had clients that came to me, and it was that the parents were not emotionally available. And so they gave lots of gifts and maybe paid for voice lessons or other things. And so the child had to be almost like a trophy on the shelf. Look at my child. She's all A student, all this. But the child themselves, they don't feel that they can be themselves and that they can be loved as who they are. They have to perform in order to get that love. So it's a very, it's a very deep place. Like it's not just what you could think of as obviously we have, car accident or child molestation or physical abuse or even psychological abuse, having parents that are narcissistic, so then it's always your fault. It's never their fault. So there's a lot of layers there.
Can we explore when someone has low self-esteem, what are the likely life outcomes that a person may want to look out for? That could include their behaviors, but also in terms of practical outcomes.
I don't think I can answer that question because everyone is different. It's very, you can say that it's almost like we live a shallow life. And so you can have a very successful shallow life, but it doesn't mean that the person is really feeling like there's no substance to it. Do you see what I mean? Like they could be famous. I mean, you see, like Robin Williams ended up committing suicide and people were shocked. Like you never know, just by looking at someone, you can't really know. Because I used to, my husband and I used to run we actually founded and ran a school for children with autism. And most of them were actually severe, nonverbal, like that. And I remember hiring the teachers. And I remember one time I hired a teacher who had a master's degree in special education. So you would think, well, she really knows how to deal with children with autism. Well, she lasted 1 week. And then she had a major, she had a nervous breakdown, actually. And because being with the children was a whole different story than to just, check boxes in a book. And so now, if she didn't have trauma herself, she would have not had a nervous breakdown, right? But when you're with children with autism, they're like a mirror. They will, if you're fake, they know it, and they will not give you the time of day, or they'll actually punch you in the face. They don't have filters. And so therefore it forces the person to look at themselves. And so, so that was, I mean, for me, that I find that some of my greatest teachers were these children, personally, because I had to really be real with them. Because if you're not, you will not help them. They're not going to let you help them.
If someone has deep self-esteem issues, it suggests that there's, they don't think that they're a worthy identity. It's a very deep level. I don't know how easy it is to change and to start valuing yourself or feeling that you are worthy. Do you have a view as to how that thought process can be interrupted or adjusted?
Yes, absolutely. Now that I can answer, because that's what I do. So that I do have an answer for. So the thing about the self-esteem, you have to remember, it's a belief. It's a belief. So what you're dealing with is in the realm of beliefs. So just like you can change your belief, you can go from, being a Hindu to becoming a Catholic or whatever. You can change beliefs. So you can also change beliefs about yourself. So the real issue is when someone identifies themselves as being a victim, that means they have no power to change. Somebody else has that power. So unless, I'm just going to give an example, unless the GBC takes down this person, I will not heal. So my healing is dependent on the GBC's resolutions, right?
I don't know if anyone's arguing quite that.
No, but I'm saying a lot of time it happens unless they get justice. I hear that all the time. Unless I get justice and I see them behind bars, I can't heal. Do you see what I mean? So the point is that, again, you're giving the control outside of yourself. Now that I'm talking from the person who's been victimized. I'm not talking for you and me. Like, obviously, if I'm talking about a devotee who's gone through abuse, I'm not going to let that go. It is my duty to make sure that this person is not going to do that to another child. But as far as the victim healing, they have to realize, I need to take my powers back. So one thing that I can say has been one of the most helpful for me, because I'm a victim, or should say, I've been victimized by child abuse. I was molested when I was 4 years old and 6 years old, and maybe some other times. But so, and of course, I've gone through bullying and so many other things as well. And so one of the things that helped me the most, in especially to shift that mindset of being a victim, is when I was asked a question. I think it's Byron Katie is the one that asked that question. It was an amazing question. She said, if you were to go back in time, let's say, you know, I don't know if she said God, but if let's say you have the choice to go back in time, and now this time you have the choice, you can be the perpetrator this time, and your perpetrator is your victim. Who would you choose to be? And it's like, without a thought, I said, I'd rather be the victim. I don't want to be doing this to somebody, even to my perpetrator. I could never do that, right? So when I realized this, when that question was asked, I realized, oh my gosh, I started feeling sorry for my perpetrator, because I thought I would never want to be in this person's shoes. So now I'm in a higher position. Do you see what I mean? And then this time, it brings you to a whole other level. You're no longer afraid of the perpetrator and feeling that they have power over you. Now you realize, you know, and then if you want to take it philosophically, I paid my dues. That person still has to pay. They're indebted. You know, they've done this. They have to pay for that. I already paid. I've done it in another life. I don't know when and how, but obviously this happened to me. Otherwise, it would have not happened to me in this lifetime. So as far as I'm concerned, I've paid my debts. Now I can go on. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I wonder though, are these simple, you know, positional adjustments that you make in your mind? If something happened as a child, and maybe it's our pre-rational brain that concluded that we're a person of low worth, or a person that, you know, somehow deserved what happened to them, or whatever it may be. Is that, I got this sense talking with Rambaru that talking things through with a therapist can actually help. Feeling loved now can help, feeling accepted and so on. It seems like you're describing maybe some other processes. I'm not suggesting that they're either or.
Well, this is not a process in itself. You were asking about, this is the first step in awareness. It's not the whole process, trust me, because there's way more than that, because that's just cognitive. That's cognitive. First, because see, if you don't know, let's say, you know, I mean, like, if I say to you, you know, look at the houses, maybe you want to buy one, but you have no money, then what's the point of you looking around for how to buy houses if you don't have the money? But if you have $200,000, or you can actually borrow, then you can start thinking, okay, now I'm going to be serious about buying a house. So if you think that your healing is dependent on, you know, the perpetrator, or if your belief is that I will never heal from this. I've had a therapist tell me that what I went through, nobody heals from that. I'm going to have to live with this for the rest of my life. She told me that.
Which is a very disempowering thing to be told.
Exactly. So once I have that belief, that means, why should I try? There's no point in trying, right? So I think Mother Rambaru also spoke about that one person that believes in you, right? So that's my job, to believe in you and to let you know you have the power to heal. And I'm here to help you do that. And I don't need the perpetrators, and I don't need the GBC or anybody else to help me help you heal fully. And so just on that note, there was another point, like, I think can't remember whether I told you before we went live or not, but that I have a son who had cancer when he was 21 months, my first child, right? So here's another trauma that I had to go through. My son had neuroblastoma, and he also had autoimmune disorder. So his immune system was attacking his brain, thinking it was the tumor. So all of a sudden, within 24 hours, he couldn't walk or talk anymore. So it was quite, and it was within 24 hours. And then at night I found out he had cancer. So it was pretty traumatic. And then I remember, once I was going through the treatments with my son, one doctor walked into the room one time and he said, "Do you know your son will never talk or walk again?" So here's another belief, right? Here's a white coat. Here's a doctor. He's supposed to know what he's talking about. And he's telling me, your son will never walk or talk again. Well, guess what? My son is 21 years old now, and he's walking just fine, and he can't stop talking. Try to make him stop talking, and it's not possible. He's got high functioning autism, and if you get him in a room, he will do all the talking. So the thing is, again, it's all about beliefs. The first, you have to change the belief that yes, you can. And another belief is that you need to be ready to accept that it happened. And that's another very important step in healing, is acceptance. You don't accept the behavior. You don't even accept the person. You may never want to see that person ever again in your life, and that's perfectly fine. And you may even put that person behind bars. That's even better. But you have to come to a place where you accept that it happened. And now you're ready to let it go. Now, this is all cognitive, right? So what I do is energetically, I help the person tap into their subconscious. That's where all of the things are really happening. The trauma is locked. We hear about samskaras, they're imprints on the subtle body, right? So that's what happens. And the imprint on the subtle body, think about it as a freeze, something that got frozen in time. When something is frozen in time, it doesn't lose, like when you unfreeze it, it's still the same as it was before, right? So in trauma, what happens is all of a sudden you get into what they call fight or flight or freeze. So if you can run away, chances are you won't be as traumatized because you discharged out of your nervous system the energy of the adrenaline, and so you're able to run away. So that process of running away or fighting, and like actually punching and kicking and, fighting the person, it actually discharged this out of your body. But if you're held down, let's say you're a child and you're being raped, you're held down, you can't move, you can't run, you can't scream. It gets frozen in your body. And so then what happens is, once you unfreeze it, even if it's 40 years later, it's still as intense as it was when you were 3, 4, 5, or 6 years old. It's the same intensity. It does not diminish with time. And that's one of the main reasons why people are afraid to heal, because they don't want to go back there. It's too painful, right? Mm-hmm. And so that's why they will numb themselves with alcohol or drugs, or, because it's too painful. So then if you've gone through it again and again and again and again, like a lot of the Guru Coolies, they've gone through it. You're talking years of really, really severe abuse. They have to live with this. It's stuck in their bodies. It's stuck in their subtle bodies. And they have to walk around with this. It's like you're walking around with 100-pound bag of stuff on you all the time, and you can't put it down. It's extremely exhausting, even just going through one more day. That's why we lost some of them. It's really, really painful. And that's very real. It's very, very real. I mean, you could go to full-blown panic attack. I mean, this is like a time, you're walking with a time bomb. Somebody just triggers you, and, because you have all of that accumulated. So that's what I do is I help them to see, okay, you're ready to heal, you can heal, and you have the power. You don't need anybody else. And then
it seems that beliefs may or may not be things that we can cognitively control. Like, someone may tell me I'm valuable, but whether I believe that or not doesn't appear to be something that's entirely within my control, if that makes sense. So there's something about belief that seems involuntary,
But that's,
Um,
see, that's the reason. The reason is because it's not a cognitive thing. See, the thing is that when you, okay, so for me, let me try to see if I can explain that, because on an energetic level, you have the trauma, you have the emotions. These are all energies. Everything's energy. The physical body is an energy. It's just dense energy. Now the subtle body is different energy. So you're talking about anger and terror and all that. These are all energies that are lower vibration or mode of ignorance, whatever you want to call it. It's very heavy energies, right? That's why people live with depression. And so those are frozen negative energies inside of you. I go inside someone's energy body sometimes, and their whole body, I feel like it's a rock, literally. It's just like they're so tense. And I need to, anyway, this goes more into the energetic part of it. But you know, the thing is that, how can I explain it? So even if I cognitively tell you that you're worthy, it doesn't change any of that, right? So I have to go systematically. First, just even on intellectual platform, just even philosophically, if you can believe that philosophically, that, you know, if you believe that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you believe that you're Krishna's servant and that you're part and parcel of Krishna, right? Then obviously you're valuable. Why wouldn't you be? Why would Krishna create something that has no value? I mean, even a worm is valuable, right? Even a bee is valuable. Why is a human being not valuable?
yeah.
When you really think about it, why would a human being not be valuable?
Can a person address these things by themselves? Are they always dependent on the intervention of a suitable therapist of some kind, some modality? Um, Obviously, there are issues that someone who's had their boundaries violated will have trusting anybody. So, how does one get comfortable with the idea of allowing someone to make adjustments to their subtle body or even to disclose to a therapist?
Obviously, this is all personal to each person. But the thing is that I guess you have to hit a place of despair, you know, and then as far as the therapist is concerned, or someone like me is concerned, we have to build the trust. Trust must be there. I mean, just to give you an example, when I had the school for children with autism, there was one child in particular who was nonverbal. Few words, could say hi, you know, there was a few words, but nothing much. And his previous school, because he was always getting up and, you know, flapping his hands and jumping up and down, they tied him up to the chair. Now, the thing is, they're looking at autism from the outside. I looked at autism from the inside. These children are traumatized on a regular basis. Adrenaline is coursing through their vein constantly. They're stuck in fight or flight. So this child was highly in anxiety, like heightened anxiety. So whenever you get close to him, he would start screaming. So what I did is I gave him a room all to himself. And because he used to like to line up objects. So I gave him, you know, colored pencils, all kinds of things. So he could just line up things all day long. I didn't ask him for anything. And then every once in a while I would get close, like, you know, get to the door, and he would scream, and I'd say, no, say no. And then he would put his hand and he would say no. And then I would run away. And then he understood, okay, my words, you know, they have power. When I say no, she walks away. So now he stopped screaming and he would just say no. Well, after 6 months of me doing that, he started sitting on my lap, sharing his apple with me. He actually was able to, like, in the last 3 months of school, he was able to learn how to read, which for about 5 years in school, he had no progress for 5 years. And I took 6 months to build trust with him. And then after that 6 months, he was learning like anything. And he was so happy. Even his mom told me, she said, I've never seen him so happy before, because I needed to build that trust with him. Now with other people, that won't take 6 months, but we're dealing with a child who's had his trust betrayed. And I mean, it was pretty bad what happened to him. But so
You're
basically,
approaching all of this with a mindset of a healer and of a teacher. I'm thinking about other community members who might look at the behaviors of someone who's playing up. They may be in a depression, or they may be, what's the word, raging against authority. There may be various ways in which trauma is playing out. How might community members understand, put themselves in the person's shoes, best respond to these sort of things that concern them? Do we just accept that the person's depressed and indulge them in it? Do we challenge them? Is it okay to preach?
So basically, your question is actually now about what would I suggest for a community member, someone who's not trained like I am. Okay, so that's a whole different thing. I would never advise them to be a therapist. They should not, because they're not trained. So please refrain from giving any advice and just listen. And just listen with the mindset and the heart. Like, take a moment before you approach the person to go within your heart and really see, why do I want to talk with this person? So you have to be in a place in your heart that you truly care about the person. If you don't, it's better you don't say anything and you don't approach them. That would be my best, because again, it's not so much in what we say as it is with really, just like with children, again, giving that example because it's an easy one to understand. With the kids in my school, I always made sure that I hired teachers that loved the kids. If it didn't love the kids, even if they have a PhD, it doesn't matter to me, because first you have to love. Because you can't teach someone how to love, but you can teach someone techniques. So if somebody really cares, it comes through. You feel it. Energetically, you feel it, whether you feel energies or not. You can feel it when somebody is genuine, and you can feel it when somebody is fake. They'll look at you and say, so Damodar, Prabhu, how are you? And then they're looking away, or yes, and then they're looking at their phones, like obviously they don't care. They just said, how are you doing? But they're not really interested to hear what you have to say. So if you truly genuinely care for someone, I would say just listen. Just refrain from giving any advice whatsoever. Just listen and be there. Give hugs, hold their hands, and just be there for them. That's really the best thing I can say, because that everybody can do if they actually care and love for someone, and that means a lot.
I sense that sometimes community members genuinely feel some form of care, but they think that the answer is going to be there in the Bhagavad Gita. And of course, at some level, the answer is there in the Bhagavad Gita. But they feel like the way that they're trying to express their let me help you ease your burden is, here's a different way of looking at something. As you say, it's like a cognitive solution.
So if for that, I would say, just go ahead and sign your name up to give a class. That's my best advice. If they have an urge to preach to someone, just give a class. And then if the person is sitting in the class, they will hear it, and they will hear what they're ready to hear. But it's not directed at them personally. Just give it to the whole general. And you could think about, okay, I know that this person is going through problems, so let me give a class on that specific subject. But you're not doing it on a personal level. Do you see what I mean? Mm-hmm. So therefore, many times, personally, I found solace so much, like probably I would say 80% of my healing was listening to Srila Prabhupada's lectures, because it helped me to really get to a transcendental, like at least understanding the transcendental way of understanding. And also just the association with a pure devotee is very powerful. But again, it's in a class form. I mean, it's just like, my son isn't, I don't know whether he's going to live or die. Imagine someone coming to me and say, your son is not his body. It's like, yes, I do know that. Thank you very much for telling me, but I'm about to lose my son. So could you please go home? If that's all you want to say to me, just here's the door. Because right now I'm grieving. This is not the time. Do you see what I mean? Like, this is not, it's not a way to help. So if you want to help that way and you're really good and philosophical, then give a class. That would be my best advice. But please don't preach to people directly like that. That's like almost an insult, because cognitively, but it doesn't mean you're like, even I was listening to one of the 1968 lectures in Montreal, and Srila Prabhupada said that Krishna was preaching to Arjuna about, we're not the body and all that. But then Arjuna said to Krishna, yes, but I love my family members. I'm about to kill my own teacher, my own family member. That hurts. And then Srila Prabhupada said, this is a concession because of material affection. It doesn't mean that he's a fool. Like Arjuna is a pure devotee. It doesn't mean that he didn't feel the pain of losing his son Abhimanyu, right? So he did get over it, but he did grieve as well. There was a time in the Vedic time, if you read Mahabharata, there was a whole time of grieving. They were wailing. There is a place for that. There is a place for grieving, in that culture. They understand, because what happens if you don't, it gets stuck. And that's what we're dealing with. We're in this society, the Western society, emotions are taboo. I mean, when I was going through my, through almost losing my son to cancer and all of that, I remember I had like a counselor said to me, because I was crying on the phone, I was like, not hysterical, but I was like weeping, and it made her very uncomfortable. And she started talking to me about medication, and I'm thinking, am I not supposed to feel like this? I'm about, like, I could lose my son at any moment. This is my only son, and he's like 2 years old, and I have to hold him down while they're, doing medical procedures. It's like literally torture. But I have to hold him down while he's screaming bloody murder, and they're like putting stuff in him. I mean, it's like I have to torture my son for saving his life. But I knew that he was being traumatized. And so it was like heavy for me to have to do this. Here I am, his loving mother, holding him down while they're doing this. You know what I mean? It was really intense. So why should I not cry? Isn't that a normal thing to go through this, right? So this is one of the things which I want to give that space. And I think Mother Ramburu was talking about that. This is a space. That's why I guess another thing that I could really highly recommend to anyone is to have a support group. I mean, it helped me so much. When my son was going through cancer, I joined a support group of other parents going through going through that experience with their child. I even went to camps, cancer camps with other parents. And it was one of the most healing experience, because it's like you're with perfect strangers, and you immediately, as soon as you meet, it's like you just met your best friend. You don't have to talk. You don't have to say anything. They understand. There's not even need for any kind of talk. You just look at each other and you just know. And literally, we're just nodding at each other. We just know. Like even one time, I also, because my son has high functioning autism, I joined autism support group with other moms. And I remember one time I was going through, anyway, I can't remember exactly, but I was going through it. And literally, I couldn't even get off the floor. I literally could not pick my body up. I was so, dysfunctional. And I remember I called different devotees, and nobody really understood. Nobody said, okay, I'll be right there. They were all busy. And then I called this mom who has 2 kids on the autism spectrum, single mom. And she said, I'm coming in 5 minutes. She dropped everything to come because she knew if I say I can't get off the floor and pick up my son who's crying, my younger son who was an infant at the time, I couldn't pick him up. I couldn't even get up and she was ready to be right there. And I know she had a lot on her plate. So, it's important to surround yourself with the right type of people. That even for me, these were all non-devotees, most of them. But because of what I was dealing with, I felt more connected with them, with that, than if I had someone who didn't know, who would preach to me. I don't know how I would have reacted. Let's put it this way. I might have said things that I didn't mean, So really, I don't think there's a place for preaching to people when they're in the middle of it. I don't think so. Everyone knows the philosophy. I think it's an insult. Really, it's an insult when you do that. So I would not recommend for anyone to do that.
I'm going to pull up a comment or two. These go back some time now in our conversation, so it may be that things have moved on, but just so they're there. So this idea that this idea that this is my karma, is that actually a helpful thought process, or is that something that's
let me just read what he said. We can't know why things happen to us. Only Sri Krishna knows why events happen to us. It is not correct to assume it is due to our bad karma. Sri Krishna's will, not karma, is responsible for a devotee's life. Yes, I mean, I definitely agree for sure. Yes, absolutely. Yes, this is used to justify our violence to others. Yeah, the thing about this is my karma, I would never in a million years say that to another devotee or anyone. This is not something we tell people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, right, in my life, because of the energy work or whatever, one time I did have, something came up from a past life where actually I felt and I knew what I did. So I know for myself that this was my karma, but that's personal. I can't say that for anybody else, and especially not someone who was born in the movement. Because that's a whole different thing. You're this is apple and oranges, because like for someone like Bhima Karma, I mean, like he's at a different category than I am. Totally. He's a real Brahmin and I'm still in, from Mlecha background, but it's not, again, it's not something you would be telling someone. And whatever the reason is why we have to go through what we have to go through, that again, it's between us and Krishna. And but regardless, as far as we're concerned, we need to realize that it's within our power to heal. And we still have to accept that it happened. We don't have to accept why it happened. We just have to accept that it did happen. That's all. It's really, it's in the past. And now I can move on because it happened, but thank God it's over. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, we spoke a little bit in our brief introduction, just perhaps prior to coming online, that you can actually be quite a high functioning individual as well. And yet you mentioned earlier, almost until one hits rock bottom and becomes desperate, chances are you might not reach out for help. What if someone appears to be able to somehow scrape by? They seem to have a relatively functional life. Their own kids are doing okay. Their own career's okay. It's not like their life is a disaster area. What should they do if they're still aware that, they're feeling some effects?
I mean, it's kind of a general question, because there's a different answer for whatever it is that they went through. Like, for example, I give my clients the example of, like, if you have, let's say you haven't, worked on your house, or you haven't lived in your house for a long time, and then you let water drip, and then you have areas in your house that got, water damage, and, like, you actually, you can't just hire someone to clean your house. You need actual renovation of your house, right? Because you let things go for so long. And so it's the same thing that if you're dealing with trauma from 40 years ago and 30 years ago, and like it's an accumulation of trauma, most people can't access that. Now, there are different ways to access it. One is somatic experiencing, which is actually purely on the physical level. There's different ways of doing that. There's trauma release, what's it called? Trauma release exercise, TRE. You can find videos on YouTube. That's something people can do on their own. You just go and you just hold like a yoga pose. There's different poses, and you hold it for some time until the muscle can't hold it anymore, and you start shaking. So the shaking, people, a lot of people may get scared, but if they can understand the way trauma works, it's stored in the nervous system. That's one of the places where it's stored. And so therefore, if you release it that way, there's different ways. Peter Levine talks about it also, but the trauma release exercises, that's a very easy way of getting rid of it. And so what happens is your nervous system discharges that adrenaline that got stored in your body. And so therefore you will be shaking, sometimes even violently. You may be like, shaking like that, like almost looking like a seizure almost. But then once it's discharged out of your body, you'll feel a whole lot better. So you just have to kind of go through this. And sometimes you just have to be mindful that maybe memories may come up. Because I know, like, I have a friend who does massage, and sometimes they do myofascial massages, and it releases trauma out of the body. And all of a sudden the person starts freaking out because it's coming right out of the body. So there's different things. There's different ways of releasing trauma out of the body. I have a friend who's a body worker, and sometimes I have her work on me so I can get my trauma out of the body. Because I've worked so much on my energy body, I also need to get it out of the physical body. So things like somatic experiencing is extremely, extremely important for that. There's many other body type of work that also helps with this as well. So, there's so many layers. That's what I'm saying. There's so many layers to trauma. There's the physical, there's the psychological, there's so many layers. And personally, what I do in my practice, I try to get to most of that. So one of the first step is get that out of your body. That's the first step, because that prevents the person from healing fully. That's when it stays at the cognitive level. So I don't usually stay at the cognitive level. I move the energy out. And once it's out, they naturally have an awareness that comes, right? They start having an awareness, and they start answering their own questions. I don't even have to tell them anything. All I have to do is remove what was in the way, and they get their own realization, and I have them like write in a journal afterwards, what their realization was. So one thing I would like to, on that note, I wanted to speak about is the fact that, the soul and the super soul is within the heart, right? I mean, we understand that philosophically. So the soul and this, soul is pure. It's not affected by anything. But then we have the subtle body, and then we have all the bodily identification. And being a victim is one, and being, unworthy is another one. There's so many layers there. And then, of course, there's the trauma and the pain and the sadness and the depression and the anxiety and all of that. So once you start piling that up over the heart, right, then what happens is this. I've seen that so many times, especially with devotees, and also with people who do like transcendental meditation, or, any kind of yoga or meditation or mindfulness. Like energetically, when I ask them to like close their eyes, take a deep breath, and then bring your awareness to the heart, because that's usually where you can feel your subtle body. It's almost like when they go down, they go up above the heart, and there's like a little place, like an attic, where it's very peaceful. But it's not in the heart, it's above all of that stuff. So I feel all of this. I feel all the pain and the sadness. I feel all of that. They feel none of it. They're disassociated from it. They're literally above it. So that's kind of like a place which is more artificial. And then once we remove all of that and they actually sit within their heart, they feel the whole difference. That's where you can actually access your intuition. When you're actually sitting in your heart, you can access the intuition and you can feel, that sense of, because we're Ananda, right? We are blissful in nature. So you can feel a little more of that. Maybe not at the pure platform, but a lot more than when you have all this covering. So what I have seen in some of the clients I've worked with is, again, I find there's like two ways you can go when you've gone through trauma. I mean, two distinct ways. There could be some gray areas. But if you look at like extremes, you have somebody like myself. I just went all out. I didn't take care of any of my needs, and I was taking care of everybody else's needs, to the point where I would collapse. I could never say no to anybody. And I was just, I've learned a lot now. I do a lot more self-care, but I had to do a lot of work to get there. And so you have people like this, and they usually go into counseling, psychology, these kinds of, areas, nursing, and all that. And then you have the other that may become a perpetrators. They may actually become like that. And so I call it the victim entitlement. Because they've been victimized, then what happens is they're entitled to do whatever because they're the victim. Because I one time I worked with a man who himself said that he would, they said that he was narcissistic, right? And after the session that we cleared all of this, all of the things from his childhood, he looked at me and he said, this is the first time I don't feel sorry for myself. And he was feeling so good. And I was thinking, wow, he wasn't a bad person. I mean, of course, he didn't molest children. There's things that you have to pay for, really. But I mean, he was just being unavailable. And his needs were always, because when you're a victim like that, everybody has to serve your needs. That's the victim entitlement. So I think Mother Rambaru touched upon that at one point, that even perpetrators have been victimized. And you see that also like in some neighborhood, which, their brothers, got murdered, and then they joined a gang and started, do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of people joining gangs because they've been in poverty. Yeah. So
I might ask one other question. It's going back to some earlier thing that we had, and then perhaps we'll invite you to sum up, including what offers that you might want to make, or where people might be able to seek help or further information, further guidance. You mentioned earlier that one shouldn't have one's own healing contingent on justice being seen to be done in the world. Is there a place for that? Like, even if one undertakes one's own healing process, is it actually an important component to see that an organization holds a perpetrator to account, or is that completely incidental?
Okay, so there's two things there, and they're two different things. When I said that, I was talking about healing. I was not talking about. So the thing is, what I'm saying is that you need to heal. You heal yourself, right? So this way, you will be more powerful about getting justice. Because a lot of time, if you're not healed, what happens? You will get angry. You will start, you will lose your temper because you're being triggered. And meanwhile, you have the perpetrator who's really nicely dressed, who's got a lot of prestige. Everybody looks up to them, and they're equiposed. And you look like a mad person. right? Most of the time. And that's what happens. And then you're the one who's labeled. And I'm not saying that's right. That's completely wrong from beginning to end. But what I'm saying is that why suffer? Why continue to suffer? Just because you did not get, what if you don't get justice? You're going to suffer for the rest of your life. Because the point is, your healing is not dependent on that. So what I'm saying is that it happened many times where people were healed and they still, were seeking justice, but they could see things more clearly. They could use their intelligence. They could be more pragmatic about it. They were able to actually be more patient and actually get the right lawyer. And you see what I mean? But if you're not healed, you may make rash decisions. You may, do it more in a mode of passion, and you may not get the results that you really want. Whereas, if you're healed, you can actually gather, maybe you need to have a whole group of gurukulis, just like what's happening now. Instead of just one person, you're all alone. Because this is the principle of bullying. They're all a whole group of them, and there's only one of you, right? They're organized and we're not. If we actually would organize ourselves, we're a lot more than they are. Really. I mean, this is what's happening. You were talking about this. The Indian temples are saying they're pressuring. Why? Because they have the temples, they have the money, they have the congregation. If they go off, they have power, right? And the power we have is we can expose you on the social media. People will see you for who you are. And then, the main thing we can achieve is that at least those who are sincere, they will find out that, be careful not to be cheated. Because, I mean, like I did some healing work with gurukulis who've been through abuse in the Gurukula in the early years of ISKCON. And going back to what people can do, listen, hear what really happened, because I personally, this is my personal, views. Don't make any comments until you hear what happened. Because if you don't know, if you hear of some of the things, and I'm not going to talk about it now because it's very unsavory and unpalatable and even traumatic to even hear about it, but to speak of what they went through, living it, it's a whole other level. And so what I would say is, if you truly want to make comments and, and preach to people, well, first you need to be quiet and listen. And then just by hearing what happened, if you're a true human being and not an animal human being, you will actually feel the compassion in your heart. If you don't, then you have a whole lot more chanting to do and a lot more devotional service to do to cleanse your heart. Or maybe you have healing to do because maybe your heart is too covered and you can't feel anything. You know what I mean? It's the compassion is the most important component if you're going to be dealing with someone who's been a victim of abuse. If you don't have compassion, do something else. Go into the Treasury Department, deal with money or deal with things. Don't deal with people. Like just be aware that, okay, this is not my area of strength. So just don't do it. Otherwise, you cause more harm than good.
So a massive thank you, Vaishnavi, for so passionately speaking about these topics and in such an informed way. I sort of invite you to come up with any summary messages, any concluding messages, which might include how people can reach you and, how they might be able to take advantage of the services you offer.
Well, one thing I do want to share, and if you allow me,
Sure.
I wanted to share a realization I had just a couple of weeks ago. It's a very recent one. But I had a really, really deep realization. And because of my working with at least three or four gurukulis in the past couple of weeks that I've done healing for. And it was a very, very deep transformational experience for me. As the, I personally, I learned from every single one of my clients, just I learned from all of my students. But my realization was that I reread again Srila Prabhupada's quote about these are Vaikuntha children, right? These are not ordinary children. These are Vaikuntha children. These are Krishna's children. And then I thought about it and I thought, well, if they were, they still are. It's not that they were because they were so cute and shaved head with sika or a nice sari and tilak, and at that time they were Vaikuntha children. But now that they're old and, in their 40s or whatever, and maybe they look a little different and maybe they have some bad habit because of the trauma, whatever. So now they're no longer Vaikuntha children. If you're a Vaikuntha child, you're a Vaikuntha child, right? So it's like a diamond in the rough. It's not because the diamond is covered that it's no longer a diamond. It is still a diamond. And I realized that after the healing session, I'm like literally feeling them. Like I'm in their energy field. And I can see they're way more advanced than I am. I have a long way to go because Krishna consciousness is already there within them. Like we all have it, right? But I have a lot of layers on top of it. They don't. The layers were put by the abuse. But when they first came, they were there. So their layers are not that much. I mean, I've had lifetimes of layers. They don't. They were called by Srila Prabhupada. So the purpose that they were called for is still there. They still have that purpose. So that's why I feel drawn to do the healing for them. I feel like if in my lifetime I can help these children that Srila Prabhupada personally called to come to this planet to save humankind, then I think my life has been successful. And I'm sorry, I'm getting emotional about that. And just what happened to them is a crime. It's those who did this to them were not human beings. I can just say that much. They were not humans. No human beings could do this. Not to these pure children. It's impossible. So, my dream is to have a place, a center where I can do the healing work for them. That's my dream. I don't have the resources right now. I have the know-how. I know how to do it. I just don't have the resources. So if anybody out there has a lot of money but no purpose in their life, then please, I have a place to put this money because this is Krishna's money and these are Krishna's children. And I feel that if we can help them to be who they were meant to be, I think that they have the power to save humanity. I truly believe this in all my heart. We don't. We need to learn from them. You want to find pure devotees? They're the pure devotees. They are. I mean, they already have that consciousness. It's deep. It's real. It's genuine. It's not learned, So anyway, that's my that's something I just wanted to say because we are speaking about devotees here, and I can attest that they're not ordinary.
Where can people reach you?
You can go to my website, healingheartcoach.com.
Okay.
It's very simple, healing heart, the heart, coach.com. So Vaishnavi Healing, or you can find me on Facebook, Vaishnavi Dasi. And my phone number and my email, everything is on my website. But yes, and I do have a special place in my heart for any Guru Kulis. So I'm their servant.
A massive thank you for coming on today and being so vulnerable and so passionate, and also obviously for the work that you do. I'm going to end the broadcast now, but maybe you and I can stay on and just hang for a bit.
Okay, thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.